I've grown frustrated with atheists saying to me that they don't have to give any arguments or any evidence to support their view because they're not making any claims. They have a non-belief. One atheist told me he's not required to provide evidence that there are no fairies living under his house either. This seems so cheap, so lame, yet I'm not sure how to make that obvious to them. Well, I agree that I think this is cheap and I think it's lame. It strikes me as intellectually dishonest. There are actually two different issues here. First of all, whether or not atheists have a belief and whether they can get away with the kind of claim that they just simply have a non-belief about God. And secondly, whether they bear any responsibility to give any evidence for their point of view. By the way, the short answer to both of those questions is yes and yes. They do have a belief. It's absolutely evident. And they do bear some responsibility under these particular circumstances. But when it comes to the question of God, atheists have entered into the debate. If they have entered into the debate, they are advancing positions. If they're advancing positions, then they're communicating convictions. And if they're communicating convictions, they're relaying their beliefs. So they actually hold a belief about God. And that belief is that he does not exist. Why can't they just admit this? That would be intellectually honest.
Koukl's promiscuous use of the word belief to describe atheism is a typical debating ploy that theists use. It is an attempt to shift an equal share of the burden of proof that they know they carry onto non-believers. The same distorted use of language can be employed to assert that someone who doesn't play rugby is an athlete, not collecting stamps is a hobby, not believing in Zeus is a belief. The basis of this particular theist argument is that, generally, anyone expressing a truth claim, whether this is positive or negative, must provide evidence for his or her certainty. There are several things wrong with this line of reasoning. For one, it is a deliberate misrepresentation of what atheism is. Koukl implies that atheists are as certain of their viewpoint as church-going theists are. That is simply not the case. Atheists are not making a negative truth claim. They're not saying God definitely doesn't exist. Rather, they take the scientifically valid view that there isn't enough evidence of God's existence, and he is thus highly improbable. Negative truth claims often carry a lot less burden of proof than their opposing positive truth claims. This is especially evident from the fairies example, and the same applies to the question of God. It deliberately conflates viewpoint with belief. A point of view may be a belief, but it isn't necessarily so. Someone who is agnostic regarding the existence of fairies is not making any truth claim. To say he has a belief would be to say that he believes in both the existence and non-existence of fairies. Watch how Koukl defends his assertion that atheism is a belief.
No author writes a book, and no person enters into a discussion or even an argument about their non-beliefs, because there's nothing to write about. There's nothing to discuss.
Really? So the agnostics who enter into the debate also have a belief and carry a burden of proof? I suppose you would ask them to both prove and disprove the existence of God. That simply makes no sense. Like atheists, they too have no belief. Yet they write books, and they put forward their positions just like everyone else. Stating your point of view about a belief does not necessarily mean you hold a belief.
From what I understand, England has rugby teams. Regarding the question of which rugby team in England is the best team, I have a non-belief. I can't even enter into the discussion because I have absolutely no information, so I am not capable of forming an opinion, and that's why I haven't.
Everyone knows that the best rugby team in England are the London Silly Nannies. The reason you don't enter into the discussion is that my belief in the superiority of the Silly Nannies does not affect you in any way. However, your belief in God does affect me when you lobby for Christian-friendly legislation. As long as you try to impose your Christian values onto non-Christians, expect them to enter into the discussion by writing books and demanding evidence for your God. The other question is whether the atheist share of the burden of proof is equal to that of the theists. To answer this, we need some background on how the burden of proof applies in a discussion. Consider any generic belief and call this A. The various points of view and the associated burden of proof that accompanies each can be illustrated using the following bar chart. On the x-axis is the attributed probability that A is true. The size of the bars gives an idea of how much burden of proof is associated with each position. A believer is certain that A is true, and is thus making a positive truth claim. Clearly, he or she must provide evidence for that assertion. A denier is making an equally strong statement and is certain that A is not true. This person also bears a certain amount of responsibility to provide evidence. Agnostics give equal probability to both positive and negative truth claims. They bear the least burden of proof. For those in between, the general rule is that the closer you are to being certain, the more the evidence that is required. However, the burden of proof does not necessarily fall equally onto both sides of the argument. It depends on what A is. On the question whether fairies exist, it is absurd to require that deniers give evidence. The burden of proof lies solely on the shoulders of those who believe in fairies. Koukl himself concedes that this is the case.
I agree that no one has to give any evidence for their belief that there are no fairies under the house. And the reason is because there is no reason to believe that there might be some fairies under the house, so just a dismissal of the idea or rejection of the idea is completely appropriate.
Correct, but let's formalize this a little. When a claim goes so blatantly against conventional knowledge, the deniers and skeptics bear little or no responsibility to provide evidence for their point of view. We should point out here that by conventional knowledge we mean the entire body of scientific knowledge, supported by solid evidence that we have acquired over many years. The existence of magical fairies definitely goes against conventional knowledge. We therefore need adequate evidence from the believers before we even think about questioning our conventional knowledge. Moreover, when it comes to ontologically positive claims such as the existence of God, fairies, or even something non-supernatural, like a new species of shark, the burden of proof falls onto those making the claim. The reason should be obvious to any logical person. There's an infinite set of imaginable beings that could exist. To default to the agnostic or believer viewpoint each time a new claim is made would be inefficient to say the least, and an impediment to knowledge acquisition. So if Koukl agrees that fairy skeptics need not provide proof, why is he demanding it from atheists? Watch.
But that is not the case with the existence of God. Look at 99% of the people in the world believe in God. And they believe in God for good reason. If you hold a point of view that is different from 99% of the people in the world, if you reject a fact that seems to be evident to almost everybody, then you bear some responsibility to give an accounting there.
Invoking ad populum? Seriously? As if the fallacy of this argument isn't blatantly obvious to everyone, let's turn it against Koukl just for fun. There are roughly 2.1 billion people in the world who believe in Jesus as the Christ and follow his teachings. That means that more than 4 billion people do not. According to his own logic, Koukl should accept that the burden of proof regarding belief in Jesus' teachings lies solely on the side of the Christian minority. Let's be clear, popular opinion is not the same as conventional knowledge. What most people think has absolutely no bearing on which side is burdened with providing evidence in an argument. It also says nothing about the validity of the argument.
There are powerful arguments that have been advanced in favor of the existence of God. Now, some people may not think they go through, but there is evidence.
And that's where the core of our disagreement is. Atheists do not accept what you call evidence. We follow the methodology of scientific naturalism, and you don't. The rest are just cheap debating strategies and intellectual dishonesty.
And I guess my simple challenge to them would be, if you have a non-belief, you wouldn't be in this discussion because you have nothing to talk about. You have a belief, and your belief is contrary to what almost everyone else holds to be true, with reason, and therefore you have an obligation to address that with something from your side instead of just a simple shrug. If a shrug is all you give me, then I have no obligation to take your view, your rejection of God's existence, seriously at all.
So which is it? Are we entering into the discussion or shrugging you off?